So we are here today. We're very excited. We have Miggy, we have Chad, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And also, a question that I want to start out with is, what is something that you both share often with Figma beginners? So for me, for example, I think a fun tip is that you can hide the UI. So right now I am not in prototyping mode. I am actually in the file right now. You can see Megan and Chad in there with me. And I've hidden the UI just by doing command backslash. And this can be really handy if like you're doing a design crit and you want to share your screens, but you want to kind of get rid of some of the noise. You want to hide that UI. That can be a really handy way to present. So I always like to tell people that when they're starting out. So Chad, I am going to throw it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what is your top tip.
Wow, top tip. There's so many of them, and I think we're going to cover some of them today just from the questions. But one thing that I like to share with people when they are first getting started, people will ask, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, what should I do? I just tell people, start just playing, experiment. The great thing is there's nothing you can really break. It's all about just having fun. Whether that's going and just starting with some basic shapes, I tell people draw those rectangles, right? But what's really cool is everything is editable. So I can just double click into that and we can start to reshape those. Maybe we want to, I like to, go beyond drawing rectangles, and I like to draw some circles. And I always like to tell people about the arc tool. It's always fun. We can make a little Pac-Man very easily there. Just start drawing Pac-Man. Just start playing with the shapes and just start to play around right within Figma. That's one of my first things. Just draw things. Just get ideas out there. Just learn how the tools work. So,
Love it.
Maggie, how about you? What are some of your favorites? Do you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So here, let me just get my screen share going. All right, cool. So the thing that I always say about working in Figma is that you have to have something to do in Figma to begin. So I really appreciate, Chad, just getting in there, drawing something. Think about what it is that you want to make. Another thing that I like to do, since we have such a wide, vast audience, is I want y'all to get comfortable with knowing how to find your keyboard shortcuts. Some of you are on Mac, some of you are on Windows, some of you are on Chromebooks, and some of you may be, have different keyboard layouts than us. So I'm going to show you how to access that. If you look over here in the bottom right, you'll see the help and resources. When you click on that, there is keyboard shortcuts down here. And what that does is it brings up a whole bevy of keyboard shortcuts. So if you're coming from another application, let's say you've been designing in something else and you want to learn those keyboard shortcuts, you can see them here and it'll display according to your OS. Another thing that I'd like to highlight is if you go over here to layout, you can change different layouts based off of your keyboard configuration. So if you're joining us in from like Korea, Japan, and you have a specific layout of your keyboard, it is different for you than it is for us. And you want to make sure you see those keyboard shortcuts appropriate for you. That's the one that I'm going to mention. And also my favorite way of accessing it is using the quick actions menu. So the quick actions menu can be accessed when you press Command P or Control / or Control P or Control /. So you'll see this little menu pop up right here, and you could type in keyboard shortcuts and then pull that up, and you can just close that out. So yeah, that's what I like to highlight usually when I'm introducing someone to Figma.
Nice. I love that. The quick actions one is my favorite. I use that, I think, on the daily. That's awesome. Miggy, if you want to follow me, that's one thing that we can teach y'all too is Miggy just clicked on my face up there. And if you're not familiar with Figma, you can follow the people that are in your file. So that's there's multiplayer going on the file, so you can see who's in there. And then when Miggy clicked on my face, he can see where I am in the file. So that is bringing us to our first social question. We had a lot of questions around auto layout. So I'm going to throw this one to you, Miggy. Can you tell us, what is auto layout? What is it? How do I use it? Why would I use it? And how do I set it up?
Absolutely. So the first thing that I'm just going to walk you through is just kind of like a quick wireframe. Typically, when we're laying out layouts or you're designing anything, you need to consider how objects are kind of like spaced out from one another. So the easiest way to consider auto layout is the arrangement of these objects. So if I have these rectangles here, let's say I have these like black rectangles and I select them, I can use alignment and tidy up and I can align them to the left, and then I can kind of adjust the spacing. So this is without auto layout. This is just thinking about the arrangement of objects, the gestalt of those objects. Now, what auto layout does is it keeps a relationship of those objects so they can move up and down. So if I actually head over here, I have like a little bit of a auto layout explanation. So thinking about those rectangles instead as UI. So imagine, here, let me grab this bit of UI, and I'm just here in Figma, right? So this is constructed using auto layout. You can see that there's like a top piece, right? There's a middle piece, there's a piece under that, and then there's text under that. So this is always going to keep that relationship. And I can also like adjust the spacing of that, and I can determine how that's going to work. So actually, this doesn't have auto layout applied, I lied, but we're going to apply it in just a moment to show you how that works. So if I have many of these, right? So let's say first, if I have these, I'm going to make that auto layout. If it is auto layout, you'll see that it'll expand. So if I have more text, right, it's not going to expand. I did this wrong. My bad. So basically here, I'll show you if I have a bunch of text, this is how I add in all of my text. I'm going to copy, paste, 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 paste. I'm going to make sure that this is set to auto height. So that means that that text field is going to match that text. Let's select those two objects. I'm going to press Shift A. So auto layout is Shift A. And what that's going to do is as I add elements to this auto layout, so this acts as a frame, and this frame has a resizing value. It's currently hugging. So as these elements grow, you can see them moving up and down. And I can also choose to change the configuration of that as well. So I can select that text field and move it up and down. So if I was to have something like a title, let's say title here, and let's make that bigger, and I add that title into this frame, right? I can move it up, down, and I can also choose how these objects are arranged. So here I can float them to the left, I can float them to the right, I can float them to the center, and auto layout is going to give me that ability to adjust those things. So if you were to look at the construction of a card for auto layout, you can see that these are stacked elements. And then here, this is a horizontal auto layout. So these are arranged as a row and then arranged together as a column. Now, one cool thing about auto layout is that we now support the ability, let's say 1, 2, 3, right? 4, 5, 6. If I have a bunch of objects, let's make that a little bit more visible for y'all. And I select them and I press Shift A, we can now wrap auto layout elements. So if I begin to change the width of this, those elements then begin to adjust. And if I increase the width of it, you can see that they then move down. So auto layout, what it tries to do is have your elements have this relationship with one another that will behave in a way that's similar that you might see in layouts such as CSS or like on the web. So even here, if you were to have like a button, this text inside of a frame, if I select the text inside of the frame and I press Shift A, it's going to take this button right here and turn that frame, instead of just a static frame, into an auto layout frame. And then that's going to allow you to adjust the padding and on both the vertical and horizontal axis. These are just some shortcuts here that are going to help you. Shift A is convert to create to auto layout. Remove auto layout would be like Option Shift A, or if you just want to remove the frame, Command Shift G, and then that'll just bring it back to its original spot. And yeah, back to you, Chad.
So quick before we go to Chad, I see a couple things in the chat of slow down a little bit. Don't worry, we will definitely give you lots of resources after the fact. One thing that I always love to say to people too is there's so much to learn in Figma. It's impossible to learn it all in just an hour. So I think a really good goal of ours today is to let you know what is possible, and to let you know kind of like those key words that you're going to be looking for after the fact. But we'll make sure that you have a ton of resources on auto layout and how to do those, so that you can also, Miggy's got some great ones online too. And I love watching Miggy's tutorials, so I can pause them and rewatch and pause and rewatch, because that's going to be the best way to learn for sure.
For sure. Here, I'll do one last thing, just like as a simple auto layout to just help people kind of grok this better. I'm going to press the T key. I'm going to type in a bit of text. So this text exists here just on my canvas on its own. I'm going to press Shift A. That's going to put it inside of an auto layout frame, and you see it's like an unintelligible name. I can title this as button. And what that does is when it has this frame, you see its properties over here are set up. So I can actually adjust that padding and height, and I can give it a fill. So if I was to make that, let's say blue, right? And I have this as a button. And what's cool about that is as I type, it's going to grow and expand to fill that. So fundamentally, what auto layout does is allows these elements to grow and respond either to the content inside or expand to like the frame size itself. Cool.
Awesome.
So hopefully that's helpful.
And while we're on that one too, before we head over to Chad for components, maybe you can tell, there was a question that came in of why would you use a frame for a component instead of just a rectangle?
So why would you use a frame for a component instead of rectangle?
Or
So
sorry, not even for a component. Why would you use a frame in general instead of just a rectangle?
So a frame acts as a container. You can nest elements inside of the frame. So if I was to draw a frame and type in some text, right, the text is inside. It's actually nested inside of that. A rectangle itself, right, there is no nesting relationship. These are just two separate objects on the canvas. They don't move with one another. One cool thing, though, is that Figma is going to recognize what you're trying to do. So if I select both of those and I press Shift A, it automatically knows what I'm trying to do, and it converts that rectangle, the area of it, into the auto layout frame itself and allows that to work in the same way. So if you're going to create an auto layout button or an auto layout frame and you're starting with a rectangle, when you select that object and all of the things inside of it, Figma is going to try to do its best to accommodate it and create it in a way that you expect it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. So let us pop over to Chad now. Our second top social question that came from our Instagram was, what is a component? And then maybe talking a little bit about what's a variant of a component, and then how would I use either of those?
Yeah, and this is a great question, especially as folks are getting started. We talk about components a lot, right? And a component in its basic form, it's a reusable element that can be made up of shapes, text layers, frames. You can take multiple objects in Figma and create a component that can be reused. A lot of times, especially when we think about design systems and components existing in design systems, it's kind of that same concept here in Figma. It's going to be a reusable asset that you can use. A variant is going to be the same thing. It's still a component, but it's an alternate treatment of it. So if we actually take a look, let's jump over here and kind of created these. I was taking tips from Miggy on auto layout as we were going there, and I've made these, and we can see that this is going to respond because we have the auto layout on there. But maybe we want to make a couple of components here for these buttons. We have a primary and a secondary. I can select both of those, and right at the top here, this is where we can create individual components by doing one component, create multiple, or a component set, which is what would be our variants. For this, let's just create a couple of multiple components. So here we can see we now have a primary button and a secondary button. And if I press Command D to duplicate that, I now have an instance of this button. And I could maybe say this is going to be, if I could type as I'm going here, we'll do continue on there. And maybe we'll do Command D or Control D if you're on Windows or Chromebook, and we'll make this one cancel. So we now have our buttons and components, and any changes we make to these main components, maybe we want to just make them square and get rid of the rounding on them. So we see our instances of that component automatically get updated. Now, what is a variant? Right now, if we were to look at our assets panel, this is where we can use our components from. So we can just drag them out and we can use them and we can change them to whatever we'd like. It's very clear in the assets panel that there's a primary button and a secondary button. But as components get built out a bit more, you may have things for your hover states or a active or pressed state. You might have this primary and secondary. Maybe there's a large and small. Rather than creating individual components for all of those, you may want to combine those into a component set, or what we call variants. So if I select both of these main components, I have an option here in the UI to combine as variants. Now, when we combine them, it's now a new component. And we can go ahead and rename this by double clicking and just call this button. And if I look back at my layers, now when we select our button here, we can see we have a variant for the secondary and the primary. And we can go over here and maybe we'll just say this is going to be, I don't know, we'll say design on there. So now when we look at our button, we can just switch this between that primary and secondary button by changing the variant. So this can make it kind of self-documenting on what is supported within a component. If you're looking for a little closer alignment to code, working with variants is going to be more common. You're typically going to have a button component that then is modified by doing different properties to it. We can go much, much deeper if you dig into component properties. Also, again, as Lauren mentioned at the beginning, variables can come into play. We're not going to go really deep into those today. Just from a high level, you can use individual components, you can use variants. Sometimes you're going to just have an individual component, like maybe a card. It's going to be its own individual component that may have other components within it.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Chad. And again, lots of resources on our YouTube page and all over that. We'll make sure y'all have on components. There was a question that came in. I'm going to throw this one to Miggy. How do I use the pen tool? I know, Miggy, you are a big icon creator with the pen tool. Could you show us how to maybe do like a heart icon or one of your favorite icons with the pen tool?
Absolutely. All right. So here I'm in the file. I'm going to draw a frame to begin. So I'm going to press the F key. I'm going to draw a frame. I'm going to hold down the shift key when drawing it. Over here on the right, I can set the dimensions of that. So let's say if we're going to make a very small icon, I could just do 24 by 24. And I'm going to start here very small. Now, when I select that frame, I can also put in a grid. So you see here, layout grid, and I can set that grid value. I'm going to darken this up so those folks at home can see this a little bit better. And I can adjust how I want that grid to be here. So I can even make, every 2 pixels sort of represented here for the grid. Now, typically you can start with an icon grid, but we don't have one handy. And I also just want y'all to feel comfortable drawing with the pencil. So the pencil is up here in the top left. It's also the P key. When I press the P key, you'll see that you can draw points. Now, as I'm moving this around, it's snapping to all of those points. To get that snapping going and to check your snap in general, hit Command P or Command / or Control / to bring up that quick actions menu. If you ever lose the quick actions menu, you can look up here in the top left, go to File, Quick Actions right here, and then that'll pull it up. So I'm going to type in snap, and you'll see that I have snap to pixel grid, snap to geometry, and snap to objects turned on. If the snapping is bugging you as you're creating an icon, feel free to disable those, to turn those off. So pen tool, I'm going to draw just a simple little V here. I'm going to hold the shift key. When I hold the shift key, it goes at these nice angles and it helps me keep that consistency. So I could just draw a point to point to point. I can extend this width out as well. And one fun thing that I love is when you select these endpoints here, you can actually draw in little round caps. So this is going to be kind of how we are generating this heart. I can select those points individually, move them down, can select those points and move it up. So you can see how I can snap it there. And then lastly, these are Bezier points. So if I hold down the Command key, you'll see that that pulls up what is known as the bend tool. So Command key on Windows, Mac, Control key on Windows, and I could actually just drag that handle down. And I could just drag that handle down, and I could even just move this point down a little bit to start to generate like this icon in the way that I see fit. So that's like a little heart. Other things that I would recommend that you start with as well is to, I know you said draw with the pen tool, but I usually start with shapes. So I might, if I'm creating a map icon, start with a circle, double click, hit that point with the control point, right? See, I can like hide that edge, bring that down, and then just draw a little circle here in the middle and match that background. So here I can easily draw like little map location icon. I'm using like the edges of my grid and kind of creating that. So hopefully that was helpful. Once again, the P key is going to be the pencil. It's right up here, lets you draw lots of points. If it's ever continuing to stick, like you see this segment right here, it's sticking, I can just hit the escape key and then I can continue to draw new lines. So yeah.
I spent way too many hours doing trying to create hearts and that location icon that were definitely not that simple. So that's amazing. Excellent. Cool. I'm gonna throw it over down to Chad. I saw a question come in about sections. So I think it'd be awesome to talk about what is the difference between a section and a frame, and then a frame and a group. And even we talked a little bit too on a rectangle versus a frame. So Chad, if you want to start us out with sections, what's the difference between a section and a frame?
Yeah, so I mean, they're really about ways of containing, right? And there's different things you can do at each level of it. So, a section, we may want to use that to group. We can use that to group similar pieces of screens we've designed together. Maybe I want to go over to this shop here, and I'm just going to go to this shop example I have. And if we look right in here, we can select our frame, our section, or our slice tool. I'm going to just focus on section here. And I can draw a section. And I may want to say, as a part of this flow, this is just a grouping here. And we're going to say this is maybe the shop section of our flow. I can go ahead and I can use this. Maybe I want to create another section here. And I want to draw this as a section of the flow here. And this is going to be our checkout portion of this flow. So you can start to group together similar screens within your flow. This can come in handy later if you're doing things and working with dev mode, marking those different sections ready. It can also come into play when you're working with prototypes. If you want, I'm sure this will be touched on in our prototyping AMA, but if you want to do some state management, remembering where you're at, you can utilize sections to help with that. When it comes to the frame side, on frames, that's going to really be, I like to tell people that frames, if you've worked with code, think of a frame like a div. It's kind of a general container. You can apply auto layout to it. You can apply constraints to it. You can resize with a frame. You have a lot of flexibility in things you can do with frames. If you're coming over from other design tools, it's kind of like an artboard, if you will. But the thing with frames, if we press the F key on our keyboard, we'll get our preset frames over on the side here. So if you want to create a container, I'll just do this iPhone 14 and 15 Pro Max one. So I have a frame. I can create another frame within there, and maybe we want to give that a fill. Let's make that right there. And I could just put another frame. We can nest frames within frames within frames. We can't nest sections within sections within sections within sections. We can do a lot more with our frames, and that's going to also really come in handy when we are working with prototypes. So if we want to target a specific frame in there, we can drag a connector off of that. We wouldn't be able to do that on that section there.
Nice. Awesome. Miggy, I'll throw it over to you to do frames versus groups.
Ooh, frames versus groups. All right, here, let me
Groups
get
are,
my...
I feel like, a very controversial thing, even amongst our team. Like I feel like half of our team is mixed pro group. A lot of people are anti-group. So it's a controversy in the design world.
Right. What I would say is that, like, you have to definitely think of like a frame as a div. The frames borders are kind of like defined. So if I was to have a bunch of shapes in here, right? So let's say I have a polygon, like I have a circle, I have a square. So the frame's bounds are kind of like already kind of like defined, right? So I drop these in there. Now, if I were to take those same objects and they were instead made into a group, so if I hit Command G, right, the objects themselves define the bounds of the group, right? So groups are great for kind of like temporarily putting objects together. Like the group over here is still recognized. So like this is my group of shapes. So as they move, right, they define the bounds. However, within here, the frame's bounds are already defined. So if I move an object outside of the frame, I can select the frame, I can turn off clip content, and you see that that object is outside of the bounds of the frame, but the frame does not grow, right? So that's kind of like a key thing. If you think of groups as kind of a grouping of similar objects that you want to kind of hold together, but they don't have a very like a very permanent relationship, or like, even if you're just trying to keep a couple things of an illustration together that might have more organic bounds, that's when a group comes in handy. Because the problem with frames is just what Chad said. Sometimes you get a frame within a frame within a frame within a frame, and you get this frameception. Sometimes you just need a bunch of objects at that same level to kind of work together. And just so you know, if I were to select this group, I can come over here. Let's say, oh, this is a group. I'd much rather it be a frame. You can convert that to a frame. You can convert that to a section. You can convert it back to a frame, or I can then convert it back to a group. So many people don't know that you can easily kind of transition between those types of relationships. Also, there's a lot of ways in which objects are pasted in the way that they behave. So whenever you paste an object from like one frame to another, you know, it's always going to be pasted relative to like the top left location. And you could even see here the constraints that sort of define it. So frames are going to be containers. Groups are going to be like, okay, like I have a couple objects, I need to loosely put them together, but they don't need that like big nested relationship to function. Also, all auto layout frames are frames as well. So just so you can kind of consider and begin to grok that. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. And then I saw awesome Hugo answered it in the chat, but like frame within a frame, just to repeat that again, of maybe you have like a card and you've done your card on a frame and you want to put that frame into your screen. So that would be a frame in a frame. So you can definitely get pretty heavy with the frameception. Miggy, you also are moving that triangle around, and I want you to tell us why there is space on that triangle and how to get rid of it. Because I remember being in a live stream, I was watching the live stream, and somebody did that and it blew my mind. So I need you to tell us that.
All right, cool. I'll explain that for you right now. I actually did this on a live stream the other day. So whenever you draw any sort of polygon and you render it out here, I'm holding down the shift key as I draw this out, right? The center of what it's known as either the physics center or the centroid of an object is kind of like different than if you were to just match its bounds, right? So what this does is it honors the true center of the triangle with these bounds. And what that is used for is if you're going to make a play button, right? Let's say let's duplicate these triangles. Let's do a little experiment here. So I'm going to flatten this triangle. So I'm going to hit Command E, and that flattens the triangle strictly to its bounds. This one has the excess bounds that is for the triangle object. Once again, this is like a non-destructive, polygon. And as I create this, it's maintaining its center. So I'm going to rotate this. I'm going to rotate this. I'm going to make them both white. And I'm going to bring this here. And actually, I'm going to let's make these a little bit smaller. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to duplicate this, and this one, Command E, and I flattened it. So when I center this one versus centering this one, you see that this is properly centered to the physics center of this triangle, to the centroid of the triangle. This one is actually slightly off to the left. So it's centering it according to these bounds, and this one has that magic bit of space that allows this to be centered properly. And the reason is because Figma is a UI tool, right? And when you draw these shapes, you need that proper centering of that object. So notice as soon as I go to a diamond, right, that is now centered well within this circle. So it's very important and it's very useful when you're generating UI. So if you need to flatten it for a very specific reason, press Command E and it'll flatten. But just remember, if you're making a play button, you want that proper physics center of the triangle to help you center and make that play button.
Awesome. And I saw somebody's asking, is there a way to get it back? There's no, like, you'd have to undo it. You can't just reverse Command E. I don't think you can do that, but you can just grab another triangle too, to get that space back. Once it's flattened, it'll be flattened. Awesome. Kind of speaking of like icons like this, there was a really good question that came in via social. And this, I don't think I knew this answer until I started working at Figma. Why, if a component has an icon and I swap the instance, the icon doesn't change color? What's going on? It's the most frustrating thing. Chad, there is a specific answer to it. A lot of times people think it's a bug, but it's not a bug. Chad, can you walk us through this one?
Yeah, and this is one that got me a lot as a beginner as well. When I first started working in Figma, this was one of the first things when I was building out. I want to say I was building an input control when I was first doing this, and I wanted to have an icon in there for clearing out the input field, or I wanted an alert if there was a error with it. And I remember I couldn't get it to retain the correct colors when I swapped it. And I remember being like, "What? Why? Why doesn't it do this?" Well, Miggy actually kind of talked a little bit about flattening icons. And when we get into working with components and just in general with components and overrides, it comes down to how your layers are named for knowing what retains an override and what gets reset. So I have a little example here. So we have some icons created here. These are all the main components. And if we take a look at them, inside of our frames right here, if we look at the layer panel, we can see that this has been flattened and it is named icon. The same thing with the star here. If we were to expand that, it's named icon. Now, if we look right here, we have triangle different. And if we expand this, we see it's named triangle and it's named star. So it's true that, yes, this is a triangle and this is a star. But when we make them into components, we want to ensure that we're naming things the same way when they're nested and used within another component. So if we look at an input example here, and we look at the layer panel, we see right here, we have our text, we have our triangle, and it's named icon. So right now, it has an override applied because we have our colors right here. It's set to 000, and right in here, it's set to 10A858. And if I was going to swap this out, we see right here, we're actually using component properties on this one. So when we go here and we check out our instance of it, it's bubbled up, so I can just easily swap this out. Maybe I want to change that to the star. We see it is retaining that color override. Maybe I want to change this right here where it's the same. Let's make that purple. And I have my star the same there. I want to switch that out for a square. It's keeping that color. Now, if we look at right here where we're not using the same name, if we dive into the triangle, notice it's named triangle instead of icon. So if we were now to go swap this out for the circle, it's going to reset back to its default color because the name is completely different. So it's now switching out for circle. I could go in right here, and if I were to apply an override, let's make that red, and I go to change it, we see it's going to default back again because it's now square. So the component doesn't know that you're applying an override to this particular layer. So to get your icons in any component to retain their color overrides, you're going to want to ensure first that icons are flattened. So pressing Command E to flatten your icons as they're used, and then give them a similar name across all of them. You could name those icon across all of them. We could go in, I'm holding Command and Shift to deep select onto each of these. We could name them icon. That's a common thing I like to do. With them all selected, I can press Command R to rename those. Maybe I want to bulk rename all of them from icon just to shape, and I could rename all of those. But as long as they're named the same, it is going to retain those overrides. Same thing here. If we want to fix these ones, I'll deep select those real quick. So they're all different right here. Let's rename those to icon and bulk. And we'll go in here. Let's apply that override. Give that the red again. And now as we change those out, it's now going to retain that color override.
Nice. Chad, can we back up just a minute and can you define what you mean for me when you say, there's a couple questions in the chat, when you say bubbling up and then deep select, can you show us in a little bit more in detail what you mean by that?
Yeah. So when we work with our components right here, so when you use component properties, you can make your instance swap come up to where you just select the top level of this instance. And here I can change that nested instance within there. If I were to take a look, let's actually just break this one apart right here. I'm going to detach that. So when you're first getting started, you may not be using properties yet. You would maybe build out the component like this, where I have an instance within this other one here. And when we look here, I can't change it. It's just the component itself. I would double click into this component instance, and then I can use the instance swap menu to change this out for a different component. What we're able to do using component properties is we're able to use an instance swap property on our main component to say, hey, I want to bubble this up so that way when someone selects the instance, they know this is something that can be changed within this component. So we want to make it easier for people to swap that out and put an instance selector in there. The second part for deep select, that's probably, if we were to look at what keys I use the most, I probably use deep select the most. It allows you to dive down directly to a layer that you want to work with. So if I wanted to edit this text on the instance here, I would have to double click in to get to it. Or if I had even more nesting, I would have to keep clicking. Let me go back over to this example here. So we have our text here, and it is nested down within a content, within product info. I have to keep double clicking a lot to get down to this text, where if I hold down Command and I just click, I'm right on that text layer. I can just go automatically to exactly what I select. If I want to select multiple things that are buried down further in the layer hierarchy, I can hold Command and Shift, and then I can select multiple things just by clicking on them, regardless of where they are within the layer hierarchy.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. That's super helpful. Miggy, I'm going to throw it your way. And I think I saw 2 questions in the chat about Boolean operations like union, subtract, intersect. Can you tell us where to find those, what they are, and like why you might use them, which ones to pick?
Absolutely. All right. So more like Booleans. Am I right? All right. So actually, both of these little like ghost icons that I have right here are actually unioned objects. So they're kind of like a composite of all of these little things here. But let's walk through what Booleans are and how you can use them to make icons in Figma. So if I was to draw out 2 circles, right? So I have these 2 circles and I want to bring them together. I want to merge them. Let's say I want to use their overall shape, but I want them to be together. Once you select, so you'll notice it's not up here. If I select one object, it's not up here. But if I select both objects, so if I have 2 shape objects selected, that will then let me make a Boolean group. I can easily do this. And it's not just shapes. You can also do this with components, and I'll show you how. So here, when I go to Boolean groups, there's going to be 4 different kinds. There's union, subtract, intersect, and exclude. So if I were to take these 2, let's actually have like 4, and let's walk through them all together. So if I select these 2 and I apply a union selection, you'll notice that they've now been unioned over here. So that means there's just like, one fill color, but then I can also modify things like the border radius. So I can modify by clicking over here in the design panel, you see I'm adding the border radius. It almost makes it look like, they've been merged in a really interesting way. Now, if I command click, I can select the object that's inside of it, and it's going to keep that relationship, and it's going to keep the round relationship here. So I could even expand and grow that second object. So this union contains both of those shapes inside, but then also is allowed to have additional effects applied on top of it. So if I was to put in like a drop shadow, right, it's basically drop shadowing both of those objects as its union, right? So another one that you might have is, let's say you want to subtract one thing from another thing. So I have this circle here, and I want to subtract this circle here from it. So I can select them both. I can come up here and I can choose subtract selection. So it effectively cuts it out. And likewise, I could do the same thing here. I can apply rounded corners to this, and it's just a group over here on the left. So you can see I can command click and still control that cut of that first object, and that's inside of there. So if I go back out to the subtract, I could do something like, give it a color. I can apply a stroke value. I can put the stroke to the outside. And once again, I could still go back to the inside, and you can see that I'm cutting away from it with that subtract behavior. Now, there's a few other ones. These aren't used as often, but we have subtract selection. Oh, sorry, not subtract selection, intersect selection. So it finds the area of the overlap for those two shapes. And once again, these are really helpful when you're making icons. So imagine if I was to make like a leaf of some sort, right? I just want a little leaf, and then I can have a couple different leaves. And once again, they're still editable. So I can come in here and I can still modify those, and I can make those like, let's say like green. So we have our like little leaves, and they're composed of two intersecting circles. Lastly, I can come over here, and there's also exclude selection. So it looks at the two objects, it looks at the space shared between them. And when I choose exclude, right, it's like negating that space that's kind of like in between them here. So I can exclude that section, right? So then that way, this whole object is there, and that actually behaves just like that subtract, except it allows that other object to have some of its own space there as well. So hopefully that was helpful. And the one other thing that I just wanted to highlight real quick, Chad was mentioning deep selecting into these text objects. If you just press the T key, you can select text within, no matter how far nested in that it is. So you press the T key and you can select some text. There you go.
That's awesome. Somebody also asked a question about like, when would you flatten stuff and when would you not? I feel like these are good examples of like, I would probably flatten that moon shape once I'm all set with it, because I might not, when it's not flattened, you can still see both ellipses there. But if I'm ready to just use that moon shape, I know I'm not going to go back from that. That's probably when I'd flatten.
Yeah. So like if the amount of complexity that you have is just too much, sometimes you just want to flatten it. So oftentimes I'll duplicate it, and then hit, you come up here, and it's that Command E is my shortcut for that flatten. And so now that it's flattened, I can now edit these points, right? So if, let's say you want to edit it at the point level, you want to have a bit more control for how that shape is created. That's another reason you would want to flatten it. Another thing here I just want to highlight, if you press Shift O, it'll take you into outline mode. And when you're in outline mode, it helps you to see those objects. It allows you to see the objects within the Boolean groups and makes it much easier for you to edit them as well. So I can go in here and I can like edit the shape, and then I press Shift O and I'm out of that mode. I press Shift O and I'm back again in this mode. And then a deep cut for y'all is if you click over here on the right, you can go to outlines and you can adjust how the outline shows. So if you want to see hidden layers or you want to see object bounds, you have more control over that outline mode.
Excellent. Sweet. Kind of continuing on with some shape stuff. And a little bit moving on to images. I saw somebody in the Q&A had asked about images. Chad, I'm going to throw this over to you to tell us a couple of different ways that we can get images, whether we get them into like a shape that we pre-created or just getting them in the file in general. Want to see about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways you can get images into your file. Whether it's as simple as dragging an image in and having it create an object with a fill. Maybe you have a placeholder you want to select, or maybe you have multiple images that you want to place. There's lots of ways to bring images in. If we were to look here, we have a couple of our images. And if we look at what images are in Figma, they become a fill for a shape. So right here, if I zoom in on this watermelon image here, we can see its fill is the image. So I could go in here and maybe I want to choose a different image. Let's say I've got a little plant here. Maybe I want to change that out for a plant. I can choose and replace that image. But this is still a shape. So if I no longer want this to be an image, for example, I could change that back to a solid color fill, or I could change this to a linear gradient, or change this into a radial. I can always change what that shape is filled with. Also for an image, also if I wanted to put a video in there, I could place video. But this is one way that we can add an image by selecting it and putting it in there. One of my favorite ways, let's say I want to replace on each of these product cards here. Let's say, in this fresh stuff store, I'm not going to focus on fruits and veggies right now, but we're going to maybe pivot this and we're going to show some different plants. I can press Command Shift K on a Mac, or Control Shift K on a Windows-based keyboard. And it's going to bring up the UI for my OS for picking different images. And I'm just going to grab a couple that I have. And then when I hit open, we can see here I have options to click or drag to place. So I could just place them all directly on the canvas, or I get a little preview here of what the image is, and then I have 5 selected. So I could choose where I want to place these images. So let's just drop this one in right here. We'll drop this image in right here, and this image right there. So I can just click and drop those images right into the shapes I already have in these cards right here. The other method that I mentioned that is kind of one of the most straightforward ways is to just drag an image directly in. And now we'll see here, I get a notice the image has been resized. So one thing that is helpful to know when working in Figma, we do have a limitation that the side of an image, or whatever's brought in, 4096 pixels is the maximum that any side of an image can be. So we'll see that this image has been resized to 4096 pixels high. So if your image is larger than that, it's going to scale it back to this. Probably one of my last ways, where, especially if you're getting started in Figma, maybe you're working on a design and you don't necessarily have images yet. You can also use plugins from the community. There's an Unsplash plugin. The way we can access our plugins is going up to this resources menu. And in here, maybe I can select plugins and I want to search for Unsplash. And maybe I just want to say, Unsplash, I'm going to run this plugin. And here I can find different images that I want. Oh, we got this, let's drag in. There we go. I've got images that I can bring in, and I can use these as placeholders. So I can also bring in images this way.
Excellent. Cool. We have about 5 minutes left and about 8 bajillion more questions that we could go over, but I did see the last 2 that came through in the chat were about masking. So I'm going to continue on the image train and throw it over to Miggy for how would you create a mask on an image or on anything?
All right, so there's a couple different ways to think about this. First things first, any shape that you have, hold on, I'm gonna paste a dinosaur here. I'm gonna use a dinosaur in just a moment. But let's say if you have one of those like Boolean objects, right? So like, let's say here I have those 3 things. I'm gonna put them together, and I want my image to be on that shape. Let's use Chad's method. I'm going to press Command Shift K to grab an image from my computer. Here I'm going to grab a photo of coffee, right? So I have that, and I can click on this shape, and so this is now masked to that shape. So like each any shape that you have, I mean, you just got to remember that image fills images are just fills on shapes. So if I was to, let's say, have a star, right? I can take that same fill and I could take that same fill and it's applied. Now, if you want to go one step further, let's say you want to use a mask. So a mask is going to be something that might be like a little bit more complex. You want to just reveal a portion of that image and you want it to be sort of separate. So like, let's say here, I'm going to, let's just say draw a circle. I'm going to pull out the arc tool just so you can see it. And I'm gonna like have this, I'm gonna make this green, right? Just so you know that this is a mask. So I'm gonna use this as a mask. I'm gonna call this my mask layer. Now I said, you know, the majority of these things can be kind of handled as fills, but sometimes you need an object to mask out several things at the same time. So here I have my mask. And let's say I have this, I'm going to use this dinosaur image. I'm going to use a dinosaur for something else too a little bit later. It's going to be fun. All right. So I have this, I'm going to place it behind it, right? So this mask is actually going to be behind my dinosaur. So here's my dino. Let me name my layers. Good designers, you know, name their layers. So here it is behind it. I'm going to select both of them, right? So here's my dino, here's my mask. Let me make sure they're next to each other, my dino and my mask. And I'm going to group them. This is another area where groups really help. I'm going to press Command G. They're inside of a group together. And when I go to this mask layer, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say use as mask. So the object that you're going to mask out, the object that you're going to use to mask is going to be underneath the object that you are going to mask. So I'm going to say use as mask, right? So right now it's masking out just that bottom portion, right? So as I increase it, you'll see that this mask I can move around. So like, let's say if you wanted to animate in prototyping just the mask itself, that gives you the ability to do it, right? So that's like kind of like two kind of key things right there. And I can still modify this thing, you know, on its own, and it behaves independently of anything else that's above, right? So let's say, let me just copy in another image here. I got an image of a mask, right? I just pasted that in, and I'm going to put it in as part of this group. So you see down here, we have the image, we have the dino, and we have the mask. The mask is applying to all the things that are just above it, right?
Right.
So,
I'm gonna have to cut you off on this one.
okay, one last thing. I'm gonna just draw a rectangle.
Quick.
All right, I'm gonna use the dinosaur as a mask. I'm gonna right click, use his mask, and now the dinosaur, the PNG of the dinosaur is now the mask, and it's masking out this color. There you go.
Amazing. Excellent. Cool. So if you want to follow me, we are out of time. This was so good. And there's about a million more things we could do. In 5 seconds, tell me your top shortcut or your top plugin. Don't explain it, just tell me what it is so people can figure out what it is later. Miggy, go.
Responsive plugin.
Okay, Chad, go.
Command / quick action at all.
Command / baby. Excellent. Okay, awesome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. There's about a million other questions I think we could go over, but we have run out of time. I have this community file for y'all. I'll throw it in the chat. Amazing, Vanessa's got it in the chat. This has a lot of resources, a lot of Figma resources of a lot of stuff we covered today and a lot of stuff that we didn't. You can also head over to our YouTube channel. That honestly is where I learned everything about Figma, I think. So highly, highly recommend our YouTube channel. Also, figma.com/education. A lot of really great content. Miggy puts a ton on there. He's a part of our education team. And a lot of our education resources are for beginners because that's where you're just kind of starting out. So highly recommend those. And then figma.com/events. Quick poll for y'all. If you are interested in learning more from a sales rep, let us know. We'll throw that poll out there. And then join us again on November 15th for a prototyping specific session. Love to see you there. You can sign up on our events page and we'll also drop the link as well. So rapid fire. Thank y'all for joining us. I know there's a million questions, but thank you for bringing them in. And hopefully we were able to help you at least a little bit. Alrighty. I will see y'all on the 15th, if not before, and hope everybody has a great day. Alrighty. Bye.